come up and hello everybody. Is it 2, Kim? I know we're recording. Not
yes,
quite.
It's 2.
It is 2. Okay, welcome everybody. Hello, welcome to RBCM at Outside. My name is Liz Crocker and I'm a learning program developer on the learning team at the Royal BC Museum. And when we're not closed, we're inside the museum. That's behind me there. I'm on the northeast corner of the museum property today on the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation. And I'm very glad and grateful to be working at this time and working in such a beautiful place, and feeling very grateful for that. And so today I am here with Lou-ann Neel, and I'll introduce her in a minute. But just to get started, before we get started, just to let you know the next RBCM at Outside program. And if you haven't joined us before on these programs, we are live outside. So anything can happen. And in particular on this property where we are, the museum, it's very loud traffic, and we might have the odd connection issue. So bear with us if we have any of that. Our next RBCM at Outside program is going to be on July 8th. We do these programs every second week, but in 2 weeks it's Canada Day, so we're missing that one. So the next one is July 8th, and it's going to be a great one for gardeners. We're going to be in Curator of Botany Ken Mar's backyard garden and looking at the sources of food plants that we use in our gardens and looking at what does a botanist garden look like. So please join us for that. And today, so if you've never been in one of these programs, if you're at Zoom or in Facebook, it's like a webinar format, so we cannot see or hear you. You can see and hear us, hopefully, if everything's going correctly. So the only way we can interact with you is through the chat in either Facebook or Zoom. So please feel free to write in there where you're from, and type in questions that you have as we're going along. We're saving up 10 minutes at the end of the program, about 20 minutes with Lou-ann, and 10 minutes at the end for questions. But if something comes up as we're going along, please type it in there. And Kim from Learning is going to be looking at those questions in Zoom. I've got Wes over in the Facebook window, and they'll be forwarding on any questions to Lou-ann and I as we go along. So it's a big team effort. So yes, without further ado, I want to turn it over to Lou-ann. So I'm on site. What we're doing today is, if some of you may have joined us, the very first RBCM Outside in April was with Lou-ann Neel, and we were on site here at Thunderbird Park at that time. We're going to take a little bit different look today, a deeper look at the history of the place itself, Thunderbird Park, and how it has come to be what we see today. So I'm kind of going to try to be Lou-ann's eyes and move around on the property, and Lou-ann will be the voice mostly. So Lou-ann Neel is Repatriation Specialist at the Museum for the Indigenous Collections and Repatriation Department, and also an amazing, prolific artist. And I'm just very excited to hear from Lou-ann again today about Thunderbird Park. So Lou-ann, over to you. Let's see how we do this.
Oh no, at least it froze with a happy smile on her face.
I froze? I'm not seeing Lou-ann. Are you there? Oh, Lou-ann. I can hear Lou-ann. She's got a great distinctive voice. Not seeing her. Are you there, Lou-ann? Hello. Cannot hear you. Oh, I hear you now.
There we go.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Hello,
Okay.
Lou-ann. Okay. Make sure I think everybody can see you now.
Okay. So
okay.
Audio's okay?
Yep. Perfect.
All right.
Okay, you take it away.
Ela Castelchla, Ikawebetlan, Gaitlin la Mama Lilklat, Quagils, La Amkhan, Hakela Castlat, La Pungan, He's Galaka, and Yakela Hoch, a wait up with Sas. So I think for a moment there, your audio goes off and on there, Liz. It's off now. Good. So thanks, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for coming back to join us again for another wonderful, fun session. And I'm glad it's not raining today for Liz. I actually had quite a an amazing presentation of really great historic photos ready for you for today. But of course, as things go sometimes, I had computer problems for the last week and I don't have the assortment of photos, but I'll promise you this, when we get through with today, I do have a couple of images I am going to share with you, but when we get done with today, I'm going to work with our marketing folks to see if I can get that whole slideshow up on our website for you, because it really is amazing to actually see the people who were involved and the actual park when it was first set up. So where Liz is right now is actually where the first sign, the first carved sign that actually said Thunderbird Park was put up. And that would have been in 1940, so 80 years ago. The first sign was put up to indicate that it was Thunderbird Park. The sign was actually carved by a government employee by the name of, where is his name? Joseph St. Pierre. And he was an employee of the forest branch in the Department of Lands. And what he did was I guess he must have taken an interest in Kwakwaka'wakw art and decided to do his rendition of what we call a sisiul, or a double-headed serpent. So he created a sign that had the sisiul on the top and then had two uncarved posts. And they would have been right about here where Liz is right now. We now have a cement pad there. And that's where we are doing some of our summer programming last year and this year. So that's where the sign went. Liz, we're just gonna switch over to the PowerPoint and show people an image now of the early park. And I'll give you an idea. This will give you an idea. Next slide, please. Looks like she's trying to get to the next slide. Slide 2. Nope, that didn't work. There, oh, we're close. There we go. Next one. Aha. Okay, I wish that was a better photo as well, but this will give you a general idea. So where Liz was standing, if you're looking at your screen and you veer over to the right, you'll see there's a canoe. And right next to, oh, thank you, you got a pointer. There's the canoe, and then just over to the left of that canoe is the original sign. Oh, thank you, fantastic. So that was the sign I was talking about that was done by Joseph St. Pierre in 1940. So as you can see, the park looked quite a bit different than it does today. And what I'm gonna do is just ask you, Kim, we're gonna go one item at a time across, and I'm gonna name what each of those carvings are and where they're from. So let's go back over to the canoe for a sec, because this is actually a replica. It was modeled after a Nuu-chah-nulth canoe, and this was the one that they called Titilicum. And it sat there at Thunderbird Park for a few years. It eventually went to the Maritime Museum. So that was positioned here at the park when it first opened. Then we had the actual Thunderbird Park sign. Next to the Thunderbird Park sign is the Haida mortuary pole, and you can tell that by the carving at the top, which would have held a box. And I won't get into the details because it's not my culture to do so, but that's usually how you can tell when it's a Haida mortuary pole. This pole actually got moved, and we'll look at the space later. This actually got moved later on in the years, but that's where it originally stood. Next to that one, the tall pole, is another Haida pole that was positioned just a few feet behind it. And then there are two small human-looking figures there at the bottom. And those figures are from the Nuu-chah-nulth, specifically from the Huhayat people. So those were collected and brought to the museum and put out on display. In between those two figures, there was another Haida carving. And then behind the second figure, there was a pole that had some mixed origin. The record says that it was a Songhees pole, but it also goes on to explain that it was a carver who was from the Klallam people, who are close relatives of the Lekwungen. So it may have been somebody who had a family lineage that was partially from here and partially from what's now south of the border. But at that time, the families traveled back and forth and the tribes actually spanned the border. So that pole was the only pole from the local First Nation that was on the site. Just behind the Songhees pole, or actually, sorry, the one with the bird on top, that was also carved by a Coast Salish carver. So there was actually 2 poles that were from these territories. The next one right beside the house is from the Awitlala people of the Kwakwaka'wakw. So that was a multi-figure pole as well. And then the house itself was actually modeled after several different kinds of big houses. The official record talks about it being modeled first after a Haida big house, and the different cross beams that you see there that run the length of the house are one of the indicators that it's that particular style. But any of the big houses along the coast would not have been open-sided like this. What's interesting is inside that house, the pole that you see at the back is actually a pole from the Koskimuk people of Quatsino, also one of the Kwakwaka'wakw nations. And then the poles that are in the front of the house are also Kwakwaka'wakw and Nuchanoth. And then the design that spans the entire front of the house is another work that was created by a government employee, and this is his impression. And from what we can tell from the records, it looked like he was borrowing from both the Kwakwaka'wakw and Haida styles in that design. And just going over to the left of the house, we've got another Haida pole. Slightly to the front of that, to the left, with the big beak. This is from the pole is actually from the Nukhalk, and Liz is going to be able to show us that pole in a few minutes. But the screen that it was attached to was actually Nuchanoth from the Ahousaht people. And this was fairly common practice back in those days because there wasn't a clear understanding that you wouldn't ordinarily put together the works of several different tribes together like this. But that's what they were interested in doing back then, so that's what they did. In behind that collection is another screen, and that's also from the Nuchanoth, from the Huhayat people. And then there are 3 figures in a row. The first 2 are from the Nukhalk, which is the people at Bellakula. And the third one is also from the Nuchanoth, from the Uklulit people. Now the open-sided house beside that one, again, the curators and perhaps the staff of the museum were experimenting with different spaces they could create for people to sit and enjoy the park. This one also has in the front, you can see across the front top a Sisiulf, a double-headed serpent again, and that's from the Kwakwaka'wakw. And the 3 posts, from what I see on the records, that they are also from the Kwakwaka'wakw. So if we go back to that, the one with the big beak in the front that's attached to that one, and now let's go over to Liz because she's near the glass cases that are right outside the museum. And Liz, if you go inside, as though you're heading towards the gift shop, there you go. And if you look up, you'll see this is where some of those poles that we saw in the diagram are now here in this space. So when you come to the museum, which by the way opens on Friday, have a stop by and have a look at these poles. There's that really huge one in the back, has the blue paint on it. That's a Nukhalk pole. So that was the one that used to stand right outside in the park. And as you can see at the bottom, that's carved out. People would actually walk through that doorway into the front of the big house when they're invited to attend ceremonies. So that's where some of these poles went. The other, we don't have access to our 3rd floor gallery at the moment, But some of the other poles you'll find up on the 3rd floor in the First Peoples Gallery within the museum. So have a close look at those. And like I say, we're going to share a link to this online presentation, which will give you a lot more detail. It tells a little bit more about each pole, where they came from, who they were collected from, everything that we have on our records right now. Okay, so Kim, can we switch over to the 2nd slide so we can show the next version of Thunderbird Park? So the early park you can see there was from 1939 to 1952. And then after that, it experienced quite a change. So if we go to the next slide. Gosh, I just wish I had those pictures. Okay, that's early park. And can you go to slide 3? Late park. There we go. Okay. So now you can see that quite a bit changed after in the 1950s. And in fact, it was in the late 40s, early 50s that there was a lot of talk with the Department of Indian Affairs about making changes to the Indian Act, because up until this time, up until 1951, many of you will know that the potlatch ban was still very much in the books, and that people were actually imprisoned for practicing traditional cultures. But attached to traditional culture was the carving of these kinds of poles and the building of these kinds of houses. So all of that got removed. There was a lot of pressure after the war with human rights and making sure that the Indian Act was no longer discriminatory in that fashion. So that was removed. So what started to happen was a lot of changes took place, and Mungo Martin Nakapankam was hired by the museum to begin a pole restoration program. So all of those poles that got moved inside and or got put into storage, they put them there because they started to weather even further, having been out in the park. So some of the poles that got put away, the museum decided to have them replicated. So really all of the poles that you see now, with the exception of one, that are now out in Thunderbird Park are actually replicas that Mungo carved of the original poles that stood in the park earlier. So now in this picture, what we're starting to see is a bit of a transformation. This time we'll go over to the left, Kim, and start over there. And the first pole you see is that Haida mortuary pole. That's where that one was positioned. And this is actually the pole that we had to take down last year because the pole began to rot through the middle. The moisture was getting through the top and it rotted through to the core. So we worked really closely with the chief that is connected to that pole through their hereditary system, and got an okay to take that pole down. Next to that, the carving that was previously over on the other side of the property, the Haida carving, that one got moved over along that side. And what started to happen was, as Richard Hunt, who was one of the head carvers, one of the last head carvers just before Tim Paul retired as well, explained to us that if you actually floated above Thunderbird Park and looked down, you would see that their thinking was, let's place poles as though Thunderbird Park were a map of BC. And so the poles would be from the north all the way to
Kim, are we still going?
Okay. Isn't this fun? So where I left off before I blipped out there was that, so we started at the top. So the Haida poles were at the top. Next to the Haida poles, coming down into the middle, is the Gitxsan poles. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in a sec. But all of the poles that were from the Gitxsan people were placed in the area that would otherwise be their territory if this was a map of BC. The smaller figures in behind the two tall Gitxsan poles, yeah, those ones, are from the Nukal. So those got moved. They were previously a little further up. And then we're just going to skip past Watwaditla and go over to the right. And now you see the Kwakwakiwak pole, which was labeled the Awitlala pole previously. That's standing right beside the big house. And then a new sign was developed, which actually had carved posts plus a Thunderbird on the top. And so that one would have been installed in the early 1960s. It was there from about 1960 to 62. And the Quatsino pole, just up to the right of that one, the Kuskimu pole, that one got moved from where it was. It was closer to the other side of, it was actually on the other side of this welcome sign. We've got the two figures from the Huhayat that have been moved. And the pole just beside the structure is a Coast Salish pole. And I'm not sure yet. That's one of the pieces I was looking for in our collection, in our photo collection, to verify if that was the same pole. And then the final pole is a Haida pole. And you notice this open-sided structure here, this became the first carving studio where Mungo and his associates, which would have been Henry Hunt, Tony Hunt, and Richard Hunt, would have been working, or actually, and David Martin, Mungo's son, would have worked on the restoration and replication of poles in that space. So Liz, let's switch to Liz again. She's going to show us where those Haida poles are now. And you see to the left, that's the metal strongback that was holding up the mortuary pole, which has now been returned home. And we'll be hopefully hearing some more about that later this summer. And then the two remaining Haida poles are still there with us. And we've actually gone through quite a bit of seismic and other safety inspections with all of these poles to make sure they're all secure for the next little while. Now, I was mentioning with the Gitxsan poles, Liz, if you can head towards the blue fence. So I was talking about the two Gitxsan poles. There's actually 3 Gitxsan poles, but 2 of them were starting to also show signs of lichen and algae and a little bit of moss growing on them. So we took them down at the same time we worked on the heraldic pole, which actually stands in front of Watwaditla, the big house. So these poles came down so that we could just give them a cleaning, but also so that those 2 metal fixtures you see there, those strong backs for the poles, just to hold them steady in case of an earthquake, we needed to replace those as well. So the poles were very quickly cleaned. It took actually longer, I think, to put up the new strongbacks than it did to clean the poles. And just as we were ready to put the poles back up again was when everything changed in mid-March for all of us. So the poles are actually in good shape. They are going to go back up as soon as we talk with the hereditary chiefs that are attached to this pole. We'll be arranging for something to happen for those poles to go up as well. And then the fencing can come back down again. So Liz, if we can get you to go back around, I see we're running short of time now. We'll go back around to the front of the big house. And for those of you who weren't with us when we talked about Watwaditla and the pole that's out front, the pole that stands out at the entrance of Watwaditla is one of the only poles that wasn't a replica. There are actually 2 poles that were not replicas. And oh, there goes Liz again. So the first one is this Mungo Martin heraldic pole. And this was a pole that he did to represent several of the Kwakwakiwak nations and the crests that belong to each of the Kwakwakiwak nations, to serve as a welcome, to offer as broad a welcome from as many of the Kwakwakiwak tribes as possible. So that pole was also restored. It had a little bit of cleaning up to do and small repairs that had to be done. And while it was down, Mungo's great-grandson, Chief David Knox, and Mervyn Child, his cousin, completely repainted the pole as well. And some of you may have even stopped by to see that happen in January and February and March of this year. And some of you even got to do some painting on the pole. So that was pretty exciting. Liz, I'm going to ask you to do one more scoot back around to where that newest pole is, which is actually, it would be easy if that fence wasn't there. You'd be able to scoot there. Are you able to see the honor pole from there?
Lou-ann, am I going to the left or to the right of Wawadila?
To the left. And it's the pole that's just sort of behind the east side. Oh, she's going to go all the way around. So I just wanted to explain that the only contemporary pole that has been put up that wasn't a replica, it was called an honor pole. It was carved by Sean Wannick and Jonathan Henderson and raised in 1999. And I actually attended that ceremony, and we were very honored that the late Chief Andy Thomas was there to also oversee this along with Skip Dick and Butch Dick. So this, yes? Not
this one?
Yes, that's the one. So that's the newest pole on the grounds. And we've not had another pole created for the site since. This was actually part of a partnership program that we had with the Victoria Native Friendship Center back in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. And that was something that our dear cousin and awesome cultural knowledge keeper, Leslie McGarry, used to do these tours and run programs that enabled the carvers and other artists to use the space that we call the carving studio. Okay, and so as we wrap up, did we have one more slide? I think we have one last slide of the present park. Yeah, and that just shows us what Liz just walked through. So you can see now, with the exception of that Haida mortuary pole up on the left, everything else, oh, that's Lake Park. Is there one more slide after that one? Kim? No? Oh. I thought I had one more slide in there of the present park. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, you got to see the present park with Liz doing a little scoot through. So now, of course, we have once the blue fence comes down and the Gitsan poles go back up again, then everything in the park is up to date and everything's safe. And then we'll continue having a discussion about what the park is going to be used for in the future. One other thing I'd mention is that for many years, there was another partnership that we had with the Victoria Native Friendship Center was to host the First Peoples Festival. And that took place all around the grounds of the museum. And recently we've been partnering with Indigenous Tourism BC. This week we would have been celebrating National Indigenous Month and National Indigenous Peoples Day, but unfortunately we're not able to do that. But we will be doing some online stuff later this week, and we hope you'll watch out for that. And I'll stop there, and if you have any questions, let us know. Oh yes, and there's a couple of links that I've provided. We'll put these on the site that'll actually give you information, everything I've talked about today, lots more detail. And then the second link is it's actually to the Victoria Heritage Foundation. It was a good site I found that gives a little bit of history about Thunderbird Park, because a lot of people don't realize that in 1963, it was designated as a provincial heritage site. Thanks.
Thank you, Lou-ann. Wow, that was a lot to get through. We did it. We persevered.
No test.
Sorry, there was a few little camera glitches there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just state to Facebook and Zoom out there, any folks, now's your chance. Some questions about anything you've seen, questions about the park. Kim's putting some links up there. I always learn something new when I'm hearing it through and seeing it through your eyes, Lou-ann. There's so much history here, and yeah, it's a beautiful spot, and it's actually, the traffic's quieted down here for a moment.
Of course it did.
Now it has.
Yeah, now it did. Well, I really hope we can get all of the rest of the historic photos that we have from our archives. I'll have to retrieve those again and put them somewhere safer, so that people can see all of the wonderful history and the different kinds of gatherings that took place over the years on the park.
Yeah, and we can, once you've got those, we can put those up on the learning portal fairly quickly. Excellent. And share that out with people. That would be great. That would be great. Yeah. It was interesting. While we were talking, I've got Alyssa, security guard. You don't have to come on camera, but somebody was asking you about the polls when you were talking, Lou-ann. What was the question?
Oh, I had a question, just about what was going on here. So I told her about RBC and outside, but also a question about the polls outside the Parliament building and how long they were.
Oh, interesting. I don't know if you heard that, but somebody was asking Alyssa, security guard here, about the polls on the legislative grounds. If there's a connection to any of the polls here. Do you know anything about the polls over there, Lou-ann? That's a test question.
Yeah, well, here you go. I was around when that pole went up. The pole on the lawn of the legislature is carved by Cicero August, and that was probably done in the mid to late 90s. And I remember being there for that ceremony too. I probably have a whole bunch of photos about it, but it is not part of the Royal BC Museum's collection.
I'll have to go over and take a closer look. Yeah, well, thank you, Lou-ann, again, for all your extra in-depth knowledge and the extra research you did in preparation for today. Welcome. Kim, Wes, we're okay for questions? I think, because we're at time now, I think we're going to have to close it. Yeah. Thank you again, Lou-ann, for joining us today. And we will post links on our YouTube playlist of this program. If you know someone that wanted to see it and couldn't get to the live version, it will be recorded and posted to YouTube. So yeah, hopefully you can check it out there as well. So thank you very much. And we'll say goodbye. Everybody stay well and healthy out there. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.